back to the Nerdy Neighborhood, everybody. Welcome back to your Friendly Neighborhood Comic Show. I'm your host, Lauren, your Friendly Neighborhood Bi. And here with me today, we have a brand new guest, not brand new to his theme, but brand new to his show, indie comic creator, cooking with us today. We've got Trevor, who is actually CEO of Pocket Watch Press. So if you guys haven't heard of that yet, you're going to hear a lot about that today. And creator of a Kickstarter that's going on right now, Area 51, the HELIX Project. How are you, Trevor?
I'm doing well. I am stringing myself together with caffeine and ambition, but I'm doing quite well. You know, Kickstarter is in a good spot, people seem to be kind of foaming at the mouth for the material, and that is the easiest way to motivate yourself through any caffeine deprivation. But thank you for having me, Lauren. I'm really glad to be here.
Yeah, no, thanks for making the time and all that. I know it's like running a never-ending marathon between not just the Kickstarter, but also running your own, company with comics. Essentially, it was hard back in the day, from what I hear, and nowadays it seems next to impossible to start a new one.
It's insane. You go into it with like these artistic ambitions, and you realize that, particularly in the beginning, you end up spending more of your time doing everything but catering to those artistic inclinations. Like I think I probably spend 30% of my time writing, and somewhere near 60% of my time marketing. But it becomes necessary, right? Like if you want to put yourself in a position to perpetuate an artistic career, you got to get down and dirty, and you got to find a way to make money doing it. So but these are the best parts of the marketing, just getting to kind of have conversation and connect. When you throw out like dozens of social media posts a week, that stuff gets like super dry. So it's cool to be able to like interact with a human being about the material. So
it does. Yeah, and doing all the like scheduling the tweets and stuff, and it's like, God, did I schedule that? And what time is that set at? Is it set for AM or PM? Like, dear God. And you're right, like looking, doing a lot of that myself as well, looking at the numbers, and it is nice to see people, but it's kind of hard at first for me because I'm kind of grouchy at first. Like that transition is hard because I'm like, oh God, I can't be mad at you. You're a nice human being. Let me remember to like be a human as well.
yeah, that can be difficult. I mean, working in any community, but like you're playing in a community of artists who are naturally sensitive, for better or for worse. You're kind of walking a tightrope sometimes, and that's kind of I mean, some people would say it's an unfortunate factor, some people think it's necessary. I think it's somewhere in between. I'm more of like the moderate type, so I think generally I like people to speak their mind, but obviously there's a way of doing it, and that's important to recognize.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that makes sense. Creating art, anything artistic is very personal for everybody. So it makes sense that, there are lots of emotions that get tied to it for people, right? And like you said, you can intend to say something one way and people take it a whole other way. And so I totally get that, especially when everybody is tired. Some people are experiencing burnout. Some people are burning out while they're trying to start something new. I mean, it's a crazy process. So full kudos to you. Thank you so much again for making the time. We're recording this in the evening, and we've got caffeine flowing through our system. So it's a grind then.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad we got to make it happen though.
Yeah. Well, tell us a bit. I want to talk a lot about Pocket Watch Press as a whole, of course, but I want to, just because it is more time sensitive, with Area 51, the HELIX Project, I'm going to put up here, but it looks like you guys are already on a huge, great track. You got a couple days left, 192 backers. You're over your goal. Still trying to get some great people to come in to do stretch goals and all that. And it's a 6-issue limited. It looks like. I mean, how did this even start?
Man, it was a really weird transition, because when I was in college, I was going to school for molecular biology. I never thought I was going to work in comics. I just had no friends. I had no friends that liked comics that I could talk to comics about. So I started a YouTube channel and kind of found a voice doing very analytical reviews. And eventually that led to interviews. Like I had the fortune of talking to a host of really, really talented guys like Jason Fabok and Liam Sharp and Rob Venditti and Brian Hill, who kind of grew to become a really, really big inspiration of mine creatively. And eventually it led me to doing a press panel at New York Comic Con 2019. It was a Marvel fanfare panel.
Okay, yeah.
And I had stood up and asked a question that likely was equally probable to wind up with like tomato pelted at my face. But I had asked about like, because the headlining speakers were Chris Claremont and CB Cebulski.
Mhm.
And I had asked about what the difficulty was or how do you like reconcile your like more pure creative intentions with having to do it all under the gaze of like a larger corporate entity that's trying to sell product. And when I went to leave, CB kind of like stopped me in the little aisle, and we got to talking, and he had asked me if I ever thought about working in comics. And up until the moment that the editor-in-chief of Marvel asked me that question, the answer was no. But he handed me his business card and told me to apply for an editorial internship because I was still going to school for molecular biology. And so in March of 2020, I made my way to New York City to interview for the job, and it looked really well. I got a call back. And a week later we went on lockdown. So that was a real bummer. And that was certainly like a tribulation to get through. And after about 4 or 5 months of, frankly, bitching and moaning about it, I was just like, I'm not going to ask for permission to do what I want to do. Because I went very quickly from never thinking I could work in comics to I could work with the biggest publisher in the industry.
Yeah.
And, then that sudden drop back down was all the more painful because of it, the pace. And by January of 2021, we came out with the first issue of Area 51, the HELIX Project. And, we've grown and kind of expanded as storytellers ever since. And here we are wrapping up the series with issue 6.
That is quite the story. Thank you for sharing all that. I mean, and I know sometimes telling stories like that they're so what's the word I'm looking for? I mean, I'm just gonna go with important. There's a bad word, but they're so important to, where you are now, where you came from. And they're also, they're hard to look back on. Like it's like picking up like reminders of like a dead parent or something. Like it's awful. It's heartbreaking. So I appreciate you sharing that because that's so cool though. Like the fact that you basically had, the editor-in-chief, like you had someone of that, pristineness, for lack of a better word, in the industry believe in you that much that, hey, you are worth a shot. Your potential and what you do now already is amazing. So I love that, even though it was so hard for you to work through that you eventually came to the conclusion, it sounds like, of, what, I'm doing it. That is the Kickstarter I needed, and the world shutting down is not stopping that.
100%. And, it was difficult, right? Because at the time, I think I would have been 22, 23. And I was just like, I don't know when this is going to end. I've already lost about a year of my early 20s. I don't know how much longer this is going to be.
Yeah.
I can't sit around and wait anymore, and so at that point I had actually declared like a double major in English so I could learn the craft, because I was never a reader growing up, to be honest with you. Like I had such a miserably short attention span, one, and two, I felt like the education, like American education system when it comes to English, is so rigid and like plain, and they feel the need to like force 16-year-old kids to read stuff like Ethan Frome, not like yucking on someone else's yum. But at 16, I couldn't care less about Ethan Frome and the climax of the book. Spoilers for like 100-year-old story. The climax of the book being like two characters like sledding too fast down a hill and breaking their legs. Like you can instill that same understanding about theme and about character with things that are a little bit more resonant to today. And so that's actually one of the major things that I hope to do along my career, is hopefully once I put myself in a position of or give myself a higher platform, like I would really like to be involved with like education and like getting comics in more literacy programs, because I think it's important. And from a young age also, because you have this intermingling of visual, sequential narrative and text, it's a brilliant way to teach context. Context between language and physical expression. So it ended up spawning out into aside from wanting to pursue a creative career and make really cool things, I think it gave me a purpose beyond that, which is really, really cool.
Yeah, no, and I love that. I actually used to be a teacher myself. I didn't teach English, unless you count doing it during fourth grade classroom. The 1 year I did that, I did everything then. So I'm very passionate about the education stuff as well, especially because, obviously I love comics as well. And I agree with you. They're a huge way to, teach literacy, but also just to teach so many other things. Like you said, there's the visual stuff and connecting those things. There's so many ways, comics stimulate the brain that they aren't given credit for, you
Agreed.
know. So I love that. Like, I love that even though you had a kind of rough start to comics, you've had a rough start and you're clearly still working your butt off now. And it's definitely, not sunshines and rainbows, even though you're doing what you love, that you're still doing it and you still have this like really good belief of like comics are a good thing. Comics do good. And there's things that, other people do that are great with comics, but also there's things that you hope to do in the
100%.
future as well. So I absolutely love that. You don't always hear, especially about how, comics and education, for example, connect.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, comics are so important to me. I mean, if it wasn't for comics, I wouldn't have gotten into reading prose. Comics was my gateway into reading
Yeah.
prose. And it was my gateway into cinema as well.
Mhm.
And I think comics are so unique because you can tie together a lot of the best elements of most other forms of literary entertainment, whether it's poetry or visual art or prose
Mhm.
and cinema even, and you can wrap it all into one thing that is also uniquely distinct from those things, right? Like there you constantly get the cinema comparison. And while that's probably the closest thing we have, cinema, the functional unit of a film is going to be a scene. The functional unit of a comic book is a panel. And so
Mhm.
comics have this unique opportunity, which also presents a challenge to really get into the weeds of the context of the panel in and of itself, in and of a sequence, in and of a page of a scene,
Mhm.
and then a chapter being like an issue, right? And while that can be kind of harrowing and a little bit, it presents a bit of a mountain for you to climb, if you can accomplish that well, then I think, you can kind of do anything. Like
Yeah.
I've dabbled in several different areas, and I've noticed that like once I got good at writing comics, I got significantly better at doing everything else.
Mhm.
And yeah, I think comics just present that really really unique opportunity to intermingle between all of the aforementioned art forms, but also you have graphic design and typography, and
Mhm.
I mean the list goes on. I think comics as a medium do not get nearly enough credit for what they're capable of.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I love your story because I know even for people like me, it's like, well, I haven't written anything big or I didn't major in English or whatever in the past, so I can't write a comic. You know what I mean? Like it feels like me, and I think for other people too, it can feel like we're at a disadvantage when people are like, well, why don't you write a comic? I don't know. Like
Mm.
I can tell you, I read comics all the time, but I couldn't tell you every detail about why this is what works for certain panels. I just have some basic knowledge based on what I know I enjoy and what I've learned little by little. So it's really empowering to hear like somebody who, like you said, like you had never even considered it for the longest time, and then literally like 3 years or so ago, you're just like, huh, I could do that. And actually, for some reason, I really want to. Like that's like the piece I didn't even realize was missing. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah,
So
one
it's
hundred
so cool.
percent. And I think it's a blessing and a curse that comics don't really have a presence, technically speaking, right, when it comes to the craft of making comics in academia,
Mhm.
or at least it's not a fierce presence. If it's
Right.
there, it's pretty sparing, and it's probably something that like an associate professor is teaching because people take the class and the university will get money
Yeah.
from it.
Mhm.
But it's sorry, I'm like losing my train of thought here.
It's
Um,
okay.
but I think the unique thing about comics are that if you look for it, there are a lot of people that are willing to share um, their approach. Like I mean, people don't talk about it enough, but there's a lot of great text about making comics. You have the Scott McCloud books, which are probably the closest things that comics have to textbook. And kind
Mhm.
of putting it like distilling it down to a science. And then you have Shelley Bond, who just came out with 2 books on editing comics, one more about her experiences in the industry and one about more about the craft. Um, Nate Picos from Blambot came out with, I think,
Mhm.
the defining text on lettering comics over the course of
Mhm.
the last 2 years. And then you have, a couple smaller pieces, like Alan Moore has a small published work called Writing Comics. And, I think that the material is out there, and we're fortunate because comics are a periodical medium that we're constantly being given content to study from. So if you take it and you try to break it down and think of it in terms of, okay, like, what reaction am I getting from this story? Why is that the reaction? What are they doing? What are the small components? And I think, believe it or not, I was very fortunate to come up being trained to think like a scientist, because I think it gave me the tools to dissect craft and the technical language in a way that I didn't have before. For me, it's always, when I read something, I'm breaking down into its constituent parts. And a lot of friends or a lot of other industry folk give me flack because I'm very hard to please. But I think it's because every time I read something, I'm like, okay, we didn't organically develop this payoff for the theme. What could they have done better? And how can I translate that into my work later on,
Yeah, I love that. I think so often, people separate, the analytical or logical people from the creatives, and people don't realize how both those things, one, fuel each other, and two, go together and often are the thing. So like you are somebody that sounds like, you have, like you said, you dissect things, you're very analytical and logical, but you're also a creative. They're not exclusive from each other. So I love hearing that as well, because I think too often they get separated when really they're meant to be together in most cases, and they go together naturally if you allow them. So, and it sounds like you have completely, which is so cool. And I can hear exactly what you're saying. Like that's what's so cool about hearing you talk about comics and how you break them down and what, how you learn about comics yourself, because I can literally hear you dissecting it into like little elements here as you speak. It's really cool.
It makes it hard to make friends for sure, because they're like, can nothing please you? And it's just like, well, like I like the goats. I like the greatest of all time, but it does become difficult. I will admit, it makes it harder to enjoy things sometimes, but
sure.
But it's like give and take, because when I do enjoy things, I enjoy them a lot, like in a very visceral way.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm trying to think of something that I read a couple months ago, like These Savage Shores by Ram V and
Sumit Kumar. Good. Yeah.
And like I was in New York after New York Comic Con. I had just picked up the trade at the show, and I was at a coffee shop just absolutely barreling through that trade, like just absolutely ignoring my emails, ignoring that I had like a script that I probably needed to edit. And like that was for me like a really pure visceral reaction, because I mean, everything has its faults, but it was operating on such a high level of craft that all I could do was sink my teeth into it until there was no more, to consume. So it's a trade-off. I think like below a certain bar, it does become very hard for me to enjoy things. But if something manages to overtake the bar, then I'm all for it. Like I can't get enough.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, I think there's room for all of that, right? Like this is going to be controversial, I guess, for me to say too, but like, I think sometimes in comics, because we, and myself included at times, we want people to succeed so much, and we love our craft. And we also know that it's a challenging industry, for lack of a better way, right? Like, just feel like that's a nice way of saying it. I feel like, we want to encourage people, right? Like, so sometimes it's like, hey, this is amazing, I want to tell you that. But there's also sometimes 5 ways in my head I could tell you this could be different, this could be better, and this could be better. But unless they ask for it, right? Unless they want that constructive feedback, I'm not going to offer it usually myself, because I'm like, I don't want to overstep, right? It's their craft. I want them to feel motivated. I don't want to, but also they do have a while to go. So, but I think, the fact that you are critical, I guess, at times, I think that can be helpful, as long as, like you said earlier, when we were talking, you find the best way you can say it and deliver that information, so that even if they're like, man, I really thought this was it, but I guess not, hopefully later they might take your advice or what have you, rework it, and then it's like, look how much better that worked out. Like it, stinks you had to rework it or do whatever, but like, look, like that's really cool. So I think it's good that there are people that have a balance, it sounds like you do there.
Yeah, I think sometimes I just being self-condemning, I probably step over the line of being a little bit too critical sometimes, but I think it is important to like check your taste at the door, know what you are innately kind of driven to, and look at something on its own terms and how it accomplishes what it's setting out to do. And if you have any ancillary notes that are independent of that, then make that known, just like, this is a me thing. I prefer a character-driven story as opposed to a plot-driven story, so I'm not drawn to this as much.
Yeah.
Versus, having conversations about the way a page, is flowing or developing a sense of atmosphere when you can tell that they're going for something, but not quite accomplishing it. I think those are two very different forms of criticism, and I think most people don't recognize that, and most people that are all too willing to offer criticisms are probably in least in the position to do that.
Yes.
Because it becomes personal, it becomes emotional, it becomes them kind of articulating their taste as opposed to understanding the technicalities of the media. So yeah, I think it's pretty major, and hopefully people kind of develop the mindset of checking their own desires and what they tend to abide by at the door, and just look at something as it is.
Yeah. Well, I think the nice thing, at least for you here, is that it's very clear that people really love what you're doing here, given that you're nearly doubling your goal, which is great, with, at the time we're recording this, 6 days left. So that's amazing. I mean, I'm sure people can like poke little things. I'm sure you yourself are like, oh, I could have done that better. But like, this is so cool. And with Area 51, I love this premise, of you've got a half-breed son of an extraterrestrial who, the father, masquerades as a human, and then, our main character ends up, Kent, he sees his dad die while he's saving a human child, and then sees his alien form. So basically, while he watches his dad die, he's like, by the way, my dad's an alien. What? And then gone. So, then he runs into some people years and years later. They're like, hey, by the way, we can figure out what exactly completely happened there. We can also find your dad. So where in the world did an idea like this come from? I feel like there's a lot of really cool influences between the alien extraterrestrial stuff, but also just the familial themes.
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot, like, it always comes from a personal place. For me, I mean, when it comes to the alien angle, the biggest piece of advice I always got from people that I admire was to write what you know. And I spent way too much fucking money learning about molecular biology. So I thought that, it's kind of a no-brainer for my first project to topically be related to something that I spent a lot of time learning about. And I think it removes a little bit of a barrier to entry, right? Because it's a little bit less research than I have to do. And it takes off a little bit of the stress of trying to make the project as bulletproof as I possibly can. And so, yeah, when I thought about like the story I wanted to tell, for me, the most visceral and emotional, most viscerally and emotionally resonant components were like, I was a 22-year-old kid who had no idea who the fuck he was. Like, I thought I was going to go to school and become a doctor and go off to do these variable, like, of prestigious things, like I was interning at Yale in a lab, and I thought that was my future. And then suddenly comics knocks on my door, which I never thought was possible. And now suddenly, like, a pipe dream is a reality, and then it's gone. And for me, like, I wanted to tell a story about identity because I didn't know who I was or where I was going. And it, being able to tie in our like emotional and personal identity to our physical identity with the whole DNA motif and the shape-shifting aliens, I thought was going to be really resonant. And I think it gave me a doorway to make this story more about the emotionality, more about the human themes, even so than like the cool sci-fi elements and the conspiracy of it all,
Yeah. And that's the cool thing that I really like about this project, is that there's such a great mix of both. Even if, it seems like you definitely lean more into the human themes, which I enjoy, the examination of the emotions and stuff, and the psychological stuff. That fascinates me. So I adore that. But still having that, conspiracy, the mystery, the thriller to it, and all this sci-fi stuff. Because for me, and a lot of sci-fi projects I see, they look really cool, but they go too much into sci-fi for me, and it misses a lot of this other stuff that I'm like, I can't get attached to these characters the way you want me to without it. And it's nobody's fault. It's just a different way of writing it. So yeah, I absolutely adore that. You know, did you originally plan this to be 6 issues, or did it evolve into that?
No, it was pretty much always 6 issues. I think, there were certain things that changed over the course of the time, but for me, I wanted to tell something that had a definable beginning, middle, and end, because I think a
Mhm.
lot of people, and even those that I admire, are not good at ending their stories, and I think
Yeah.
that's such a buzzkill. And so I really wanted that to be something under my belt, so that I knew how to do it, and that it was a tool that I could employ in the future. So this was always a 6 issue story, although the journey to get to that end, and the way we delivered it changed over time. I refer to myself more as like a gardener when it comes to
Mhm.
writing, as opposed to an architect. I give myself the bones of the story, like the bones, just like the basic structure. And as I'm going along, I'm outfitting the skeleton with the musculature and with the organs, because I don't think that, with very rare exception, there is no way you understand your characters holistically without having written them first.
Yes.
Or at least that's true in my case. I
Mhm.
got to know these characters and who they are, what they wanted, what challenged them by writing them. And my perception changed over the course of letting them tell their story, as opposed to shoveling my influence um,
Mhm.
on those characters, and what I would want for them. It's not about what they want or what I want for them. It's about what they need.
Mhm.
And that was a major lesson that I live by, for this series and everything that I've done since, which I'm excited for people to see.
Yeah, no, I absolutely love that. And that's one thing that I especially love about comics, because there's a different perspective on anything in life, right? But especially in comics, I feel like there's so much more room to have these different ways of thinking, because really, depending on what it is, you can't actually be completely wrong in many cases, right? It's simply just a different way of doing it and a different type of, product and story you're producing and releasing for all of us. I love these covers here. So many of them lean into the sci-fi element. Got like possibly the alien father here, and the thriller part with the dead kid. I mean, what went into, and I don't know how much thought you put into it versus just finding creators and saying, "Hey, you gotta do a cover, see what you give me." How much thought did you put into the covers and kind of what you wanted them to display? Because as much
Yeah.
as the stuff on the inside is the most important, the covers are almost just important a lot of the time.
Yeah, I mean, the covers were a big point of focus for me, because in my opinion, not only is it your greatest marketing tool, but it's also where the storytelling begins.
Mhm.
Excuse me. It's going to set the tone. People are going to begin to make. People are going to begin to like develop an understanding of what you're doing just by looking at that cover. So for me, it was always an opportunity to approach the contents of that issue from several different angles, right? Because it's
Mhm.
multifaceted. And that's my attempt, right? And so when you look at like the first 3 covers of this story, or this 6th issue, for example, like that first one with like the 3 faces and the vines and the exposed flesh and bone,
Mhm.
it's very much about growth by way of character death, needing to
Mm.
let a part of yourself die in order to grow and to become something great. And so we have all of these sort of visual elements of, Kent being kind of eaten out from the inside by this snake,
Oh.
which is a recurring metaphor from issue 5 and issue 6. And you have the transition from his human form to his alien form in the faces, and you have like the exposed flesh, but also foliage growing up from beneath it, because in order for him to grow into himself, there's a part that he needs to let go of.
Yeah.
And that was something like Samuel and I really focused on. Samuel is the interior artist as well for issues 5 and 6,
Mhm.
and he's, man, like that guy is talented beyond my wildest dreams, and also a fundamentally great storyteller in his own right. And that's what made this cover so great. It's, yes, like it is busy in a way, but we were like, we wanted to focus on all of those small individual elements that build the piece. We left the background back and black, and we got to throw a little bit of like a Jack Kirby blacklight homage, because we thought that it, not only was it cool to homage the king, but it gave it this really visceral element, and this like, it makes it feel a lot more internal, right? It
Mhm.
implies a lot more about the internal struggle than the physical struggle, and that's been the name of the game for this series, right? Is Kent learning to come to grips with who he is and find solace in that. Yeah.
I absolutely love that kind of story, I guess, behind the cover. A lot of times I ask about covers, and I feel like, often they're kind of, blanket replies to a lot of times that's because it's the writer, and the writers give so much freedom to the artists that do them, which I think is amazing, like no complaints. But it's so cool that like you and Samuel both were on the same page with this. You knew exactly what you wanted to tell, to the point where you automatically are just like, yeah, here's the exact story. You don't always get to see that kind of collaboration, I think, with creators, because everybody's different. So I just love that you guys were so on the same page about that, and that you both are like, yep, this is the story, because that's how important this is to this project.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have enough words in my vocabulary to describe how great it has been working with him and some of the other artists who are featured on these covers. I mean, we're always talking about the intention behind the art and what we're going for. And I think the cover, like I said, aside from being your greatest marketing tool, is a unique opportunity for somebody to be exposed to the contents of the book in a little bit more of an all around, like all encompassing way. And then they can dig into the minutia and get into the sequential art and then the actual more explicit narrative elements. And even, the B cover below it, like Adrian Bonilla is an artist that, man, I've been very fortunate to have him on variant covers from the beginning. He did the issue 1 reprint cover, and he did the upcoming issue 2 reprint cover. And this was very much us capturing a very different angle of this story, and it was partly inspired by the Craven's Last Hunt cover with a black suit Spider-Man coming out of his grave.
Yep.
I didn't want to homage it as so in that like we were matching the compositional elements, but I really like the idea of it, and I feel like it takes on a whole new meaning when you come to understand this character and where you're left off at the beginning of issue 5, right? Like you're stuck in the desert, and it's this last like combustion chamber of emotion, and you have the elements of Kent kind of assuming his alien form by choice this time, taking command of his identity. And you have all the hands of the people throughout the series who have been trying to affect his sense of self and his agency reaching up from the sand, and he is effectively overcoming that, and then we have the image in the back left with Kent now in the present with his father, or how he remembers his father. And if you look really closely in the back, there's actually the shadow of his father's alien form, and it represents more of who he is now. And from issue 1, we've had this recurring motif of this hollow thunder at the end of the barrel that took his father away from him the first time. And that metaphor persists throughout the story, and is something we constantly call back to. And Adrian just like absolutely killed it. I mean, Marcio Ferreri, who's our interior colorist, worked with him on colors, but Adrian also like went back in and touched it up, and he's actually getting a co-coloring credit, because like this guy's eye for the narrativity of a single image is just insane. And another person that like I hope to always be working with, no matter how annoying I might get.
No, that's amazing. And yeah, that's one thing I love about covers too, especially nowadays that there's so many variants and things like that. There's no like right cover either. I think there are certain reasons people pick certain covers to be the A cover versus the B or C and things like that. But like, there's no wrong one, because depending on, as long as every creative involved like gets what the book is about and what they're trying to do with the cover, like every piece is important. So like you said, like this cover may tell a different, not necessarily a different story, but a different piece of the story than the first cover. They're both still completely a part of the story. And I just think that's so cool. Like, honestly, with these covers, the way you're talking about them, I'm all excited, because I'm like, I could like put these together and like actually paint the story in my head as I look at them, honestly. Like that's really cool to be able to just do that in my head, even if it's not like, a connecting cover or anything. I don't need it to be.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that, because the intention was always there, that the story starts with the cover. And sometimes you look at stuff that is really striking and people adore the covers, but they're plain and they're just not being inventive. And for us, it was constantly like, what is this issue about at its core? How can we examine that from a different angle, right? You have these 3 covers, the first one being about growth through death, the second one about being like conquering your sense of self, this third one being about the fracture, right, of the memory that he has of his father, versus the tortured person that kind of lays before him, right? And then you have the death of that part of himself, the death of that child, that innocence, that is a result of that. And yeah, I mean, Marcio, who is all this was entirely done by our series colorist.
Oh wow,
he is so talented. Like that's the covers he's done for us. It's insane because obviously his colors are gorgeous. But you can even go into the inks and there's such fine, precise, like cross hatching where like from a distance it doesn't even look like hatching. It looks like a spotted black, but you go in there and there's just so much to it, so much texture. And I adore this cover. I think the lineup that we have for this 6th book, like, I mean, I was very proud of the lineup of covers we had for 5, but holy shit, what these guys were able to do for this last one just blows me away.
That is awesome. And that's what's so crazy is hearing like, oh, this person's a colorist, but they did this entire piece here, like the drawing and inking and everything too. I mean, it's really cool how multi-talented so many people are. And a lot of times we don't realize it till, like you said, like you work with them and you're like, wait, what? You did that? Oh my God, please do more.
Yeah, that was exactly what happened. I mean, Marcio had like shown me his portfolio beyond just coloring stuff, and early on I was like, oh man, I need to get him to do something by himself. And once we hit that issue 5, we needed a secret variant cover, a 3rd variant cover for a stretch goal, and I was just like, it's your time to shine, buddy. And he absolutely killed it, and he did it again with this one, and I'm excited for people to see what he does moving forward.
Yeah, my goodness. I'm excited to keep watch. I need to find his social media or something, so I don't miss a dang thing in the future, as long as social media is running at least.
Yeah.
But yeah, so are there any specific rewards? I mean, this is the last issue of this clearly very successful series you've done. Any specific rewards that you're excited about for this final campaign?
Well, I think first and foremost, we've done our best to make it accessible. With no shade to anybody else in the community, but I don't think anybody can compete with the value that we're delivering on this campaign, and the value that we have managed to deliver, through supply chain issues and such. We've raised our price one time by $1 over the course of 2 years. And even then the A cover, because we unlocked a stretch goal, is going to be turned into a wraparound cover for free. So, you're paying $7 for a 32-page comic with a beautiful wraparound cover, printed on 105-pound cover stock, 80-pound interior stock for those production nerds. So there's value, and we tried to deliver that in every way, whether it's like the emotionality of the story, the contents of the story itself, or the physical product, because it wasn't too long ago that I was just a consumer reveling about ruminating on like how much it sucks that I can't afford all the things I want to afford because it's not
right.
So, if you are coming to us for the first time, there are catch-up tiers. There's a collector's bundle where you can get almost every cover we've ever done. And also, if you want to pick and choose, once you select your main tier, it'll forward you to the add-on menu where you can pick out any one of any cover from any issue you want, and add that to your package. And what we did was, toward the bottom of this story, or of this campaign page, there's a full variant cover menu. So you can see what each denomination, how each denomination corresponds with each piece of cover art. So
awesome.
Try to make it as easy as possible.
Yeah, that's super helpful, because I feel like with Kickstarters in general, that's one thing I can struggle with, especially ones that like have whole series things like this one does, like 1 through 6. And this is my first time doing it, right? So, when I get to those, it's like, okay, but what if, like, are you guys offering, like, if I want all the issues, but I want cover, number 1 to be cover B, but I want 2 to be A. Yep. I'm like, oh God, there's not a package for that. And oh God, the add-ons aren't there. So I guess I'll just cry about it.
No, yeah, that was like the painstaking going into like making sure that we had all the add-ons and the covers prepared. And for this one, we're doing more covers than ever. I was pretty adverse to doing, like in the beginning, for the longest time, we were only doing 2 covers per book, an A and a B. Once the success began to pick up a little bit, we did a third cover. And for this one, we did 3 covers on launch. We had a 4th cover, which we unlocked at $9,000 for a stretch goal. And just last night, I haven't put it on the campaign page yet, but it's in my most recent update, where you can check out a cover that we shock dropped that was hand painted and then colored by Marcio. And it is beautiful. It's one of the few pieces of original art from the series that I own. There are only 2 existing pieces, and I own them both. It's the inks to the variant cover to issue 1 from Adrian, and then the black underpainting of that most recent shock dropped cover, which I also own. So those are really cool to have, because the series is done primarily digitally. And while I don't fault my team at all, it is cool to have something tangible from the production.
Yeah, that's one thing I think that I've talked about with people recently, actually, Scott brought up, is, so much of the collecting part of comics in the past was getting the original artwork and such. And now, since so much is digital, that doesn't really exist in a lot of formats and a lot of ways anymore. And if you do get that, it's even more scarce and rare than ever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it is cool, because I was really lamenting not having anything original for my first project. And Adrian, when he did that first cover, it's the only thing he's actually done physically. He gifted that cover to me, and it is one of my prized possessions. Like, people always ask at shows, do you have a piece of original art? And at the time, I only had the one. Like, what would you sell it for? I was like, I don't know, $20,000. They're like, that's obscene. I was like, it's supposed to be obscene. Like, I don't want to get rid of it. So it would take a pretty life-changing amount of money for me to part ways with that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, that's amazing. Honestly, a lot of times people will have all these crazy rewards and things like that, but like you kind of, mentioned, sometimes it can be super expensive, to Kickstarter. It's like, you got all this cool stuff, but you're gonna pay so much. So it's really cool to hear you highlight, like, hey, we're doing everything possible just to make this, accessible, affordable, and people are getting the value for it. So I absolutely love that. This campaign, for those of you watching this later, it ends on Tuesday, February 28th at 10:30 p.m. EST. I did check down the Kickstarter, so there you guys go.
Thank you.
If you're running late or something, 10:29 p.m. you can still get in, but try to get in before, please. So be sure to go back. It's in the link below in the description. Just click like 5 times and you're backing an amazing campaign. Like, I don't know what else you want from me. Like,
I appreciate
deal
that.
you can get.
Thank you. Yeah, it's I really hope people check it out, because frankly, this is probably the last time I'm going to be able to offer prices this competitive, and I think it's really unique, because you can look at how we as a team have evolved over the course of this 6 issues, and while I'm incredibly proud of our floor, I think it just shows that we have no ceiling. That we're going to keep growing as storytellers. The way that once Sam came onto the book for issue 5 and 6. Just what he brought to this story, whether it was the visceral, sort of more stylistic elements to playing with character expression, or the way we were able to really experiment with page design, like, and even like we got down to a point where I felt like we had grown so much that we're focusing on all the little nuances that no one's going to pay attention to. Like issue 5, we really start being concentrated on how we're color blocking the panel gutters. Like, what are we using? How are we playing with black gutters versus white gutters versus spotted color? And how is that changing the atmosphere of the story, right? Like, if anybody goes in and reads issue 5, you can tell that like any parts of the story that are underground in this like confined lab in Area 51, it's all black gutters. It's meant to feel claustrophobic, and then you get into like some of these sort of flashbacks where we eschew the black and or the grayscale that we use for flashbacks in the first 4 issues, and that's a very deliberate creative choice, because we're thinking about like, what does that moment represent, right? And so the flashbacks in those early stories were tragic and very sort of visceral, whereas the flashbacks we play with in issue 5 are melancholy, but one of them in particular is a moment of triumph for a character who finds himself through violence. And it's not meant to be sad. For that character, it was a defining moment for them. And so that's how we kind of reflected that in the coloring. And you go forward, and there's a moment where, it's the first time a character sees the outside world in 13 years. And Marcio just, the way he blocked each segment of the panel gutters to match the palette of the beautiful sky he drew at sunset. It is just mind-boggling, out of this world. So like we're really putting ourselves and all of ourselves into this book and trying to create something that's different. You know, I've said a couple times recently, the goal is to become a generational talent.
Yeah.
And for me, what that means isn't like, of course, like being recognized is great, but for me, that means like being at the peak of the storytelling totem pole means you are connecting with people in such a visceral and emotional way. Like stories change lives. People live their entire cultures, entire societies, entire histories are shaped by religion, right? Like, and that's whether you believe in it or not. I'm not saying anything isn't real, but it is a story, right? And whether you believe it true or not is up to your discretion. But they're stories that people live generational, you know, like that carry over generationally, that implores billions of people to live their lives a certain way. And so like, to me, if you are the best in the world at what you do, and if that happens to be storytelling, then you connect people. You know, storytelling is the connective tissue between the world, between various societies, between culture, between geographies. And I think that's powerful. I think that's a tool that that is an element of storytelling that doesn't get brought up enough. So, you know, at the end of the day, like we want to connect. You know, we're telling a story about identity and how we reconcile that with our memories and with loss. And that's so human, whether you are from where I'm from, you know, in New England in the United States, or whether you are from Mumbai, India. You know, they're relevant. It doesn't matter what walk of life you come from. And I think that is a really distinctly unique tool that storytellers have in their tool belt when done right. And that's what we're going for every time.
Yeah. No, that's amazing. Honestly, I feel like you just said it all. Like, I don't even need to be here anymore. Trevor knows everything he's doing. So just listen to Trevor, everybody. But seriously, I'm just super excited for you. I'm super excited for Pocket Watch. You know, what can you share, of course, without giving too much away? What can you share about, you know, what's next for Pocket Watch Press? You know, once this gets filled out and this project's done, what in the world is next on your docket?
I am so excited for everybody to see what we're working on right now. So the most direct thing that I'm doing after the HELIX project is a collection of short stories, graphic short stories that I've written, each of them pairing me with a different team of artists. Ooh. Some are familiar faces. You're 100% going to see Sam there. You're going to see Marcio in there. But there are some new incredibly talented faces that are going to be joining the team for that project. And it gives me the opportunity to do several things. One, to satisfy the creative itch to play in different sandboxes. And two, to show that like I don't want to be pigeonholed as a creative. I want to prove that I can tell stories in different spaces and do them successfully. So while there is a sci-fi story in there, you know, we play with like, we're doing a detective thriller with like a supernatural bend. We are doing this story about immortal soldiers that reconvene throughout every great battle in human history. And it's ultimately a story about conflict. We are doing, let me think here. We've got another story that is about like, it's more of a psychological story about a young girl who kind of runs away from her life and wakes up. And it was actually inspired by Sandman, the Unity Kincaid story.
Yeah.
It's about a young girl who kind of is living this kind of horrible life and feels like she has no other option but to run away into her dreams and run away from the world. And she wakes up 70 years later and she's comatose in a retirement home because she never got to live a life. She never took the risk of living in the face of like tragedy and negativity. So you know, we're still carrying the weight of a lot of those the emotional elements of the HELIX project.
Yeah.
There are some stories in here. There's one in particular that is probably the most honest and emotional story I have ever written.
Ooh, that's exciting.
And we, you know, man, there's so much. So the plan right now is we're gonna have like 6 or 7 stories in there. The total page count we're looking at is somewhere between 64 and 72. So it's going to be a chonker. And the great thing is these stories are all super digestible. Most of them are one and done. There is one that is a coming of age story that I'm going to be syndicating, hopefully in a collection of short stories every year. But I'm writing it to the best of my ability so that reading the entire getting a glimpse at the entire picture is going to be enriching, but you can really break down these stories on their own. And
Yeah.
it is a kind of a tongue-in-cheek play on like King Lear, but in a modern, more supernatural setting about an empathic boy who kind of has the ability to siphon off people's emotions into himself, whether it's negative or positive, and kind of evoking the reciprocated effect on them. So like he can effectively unload his own trauma onto other people to heal himself, or vice versa. And it's a story about self-sacrifice. It's a story about self-destruction. It's a story, coming of age. And the really fun thing is, for the hardcore comic book fan, there is a major pivotal figure in comics history that appears as a recurring character as part of the meta story. And if anybody knows me really well, I think they'd eventually be able to guess at who that figure is. And I think it's going to be a really unique story, and there's a lot of cool different styles artistically that we're playing with to match the stories. Whether it's, Sam, even like the story that Sam and I are doing together is that detective thriller, and he's taken a very different stylistic approach. So as opposed to playing with like directional line work, he's actually using more of a brush texture, and he's actually coloring that story as well, which is really cool.
Yeah.
Or you have the coming of age story, which we're calling the Marvelous Misadventures of the Melancholy Man.
Perfect.
Which is done with, oh my God, done by the incredibly talented Steph C, who layers watercolors over colored pencil.
Wow.
And it's just vibrant and expressive and emotive. Shout out to her. One of my favorite people I've ever worked with. Incredibly talented, professional. And she's actually, if anybody, I don't know if it's up for pre-order, but she's working on an OGN for TKO Presents that people need to check out because it's gorgeous. But yeah, so it's satisfying creatively because I get to scratch a bunch of different issues, play in different spaces, work with new collaborators and old ones. And even, like I said, with the old ones, we're doing something new. So I'm so stoked for people to check that project out. So the title of the anthology is Minutes to Midnight, the Hour Between Life and Death.
Awesome.
And the through line is this idea of perspective. I want every collection of short stories I do to kind of revolve around a theme that corresponds with a time of day or a time of the pocket watch. And so I figured no better place to start than with midnight, the beginning of a new day, the end of another one, the cycle kind of reborn. And I think about, like, when I think about midnight, I think about perspective and how it changes. And sometimes it all boils down to a newly discovered clarity, right? Like sometimes you're just laying in bed, you're like, oh my God, like, why didn't I think of this sooner? And other times you think yourself into a hole, right? Like we've all had that moment where it's like 1 a.m, you're kind of drunk and you're like, do I text the ex? You know what I mean? And sometimes you do it. And so for me, like, that's what this kind of represents. And although none of the stories are explicitly connected, they all kind of play with the theme of perspective from different angles.
I love that. I love anthologies that, even if they don't always like directly connect, that is really hard to do and it doesn't always work well. They still have those intertwined themes and stuff. I think that helps, like, especially reading it, all in one go. And then rereading it kind of work better. And honestly, I just love hearing how excited you are. Like, you're genuinely like, not just being like, yeah, I'm excited, but here's the plot. Okay, cool. Like, you are geeking the heck out of on this, not just because obviously there's your work in there, but you're like, oh my God, all these other people, like, this is gonna be the coolest thing because they're there.
I'm really stoked. And that's a project that I'm going to be like pushing among the award circuit, if not just for me, because I feel confident about what I did. I don't believe in false being fake humble, because I believe in my abilities, but also like what we were able to do as a collective, what we were able to do as individual pairings and teams. I think it's different. It's not something that we've seen before. And I'm so excited. And I'm excited because I gave you the disclaimer before we got on. I was like, I was not feeling great today. I'm sorry if I act miserable. And now, like, just talking about what we're doing next, all I can think about is like the inner workings of that machine and like what I think we're going to be able to accomplish. And I couldn't be more hyped. I'm so excited.
Yeah.
So we're looking to launch hopefully middle of this year with that Kickstarter.
Awesome. That's perfect, especially because that'll give you some time to finish up this, fulfill it, which is super important,
Mhm.
and also to build up the excitement and then just get it moving. I'm super excited. I'm super excited to see what comes of it. Hopefully I get to chat with you again in the future about it.
Absolutely.
But yeah, man, that's amazing. I'm so excited for you and Pocket Watch Press and everything you're doing. You know, and again, your story, you know, getting so high up in comics or feeling high and then dropping down and going back up. You're doing amazing. So
Thank you.
I just wanted to say, yeah, you know, you're doing great and thank you so much for sharing all this with us. And honestly, creators like you that get just so excited about what you do and the other people you work with, like that's what this is all about. That's what
Thank
this
you.
whole community is for.
I appreciate that, and it is a pleasure. Like it really, like to your credit as an interviewer, you brought that excitement out in me. You know,
Aw.
you knew what buttons to push in a good way, and you don't. You know, I said it before. Like you get on these interview circuits, and I'm grateful for every opportunity I have. But not
Yeah.
often do I get to be just kind of emotional about what I do. So all the more credit to you, Lauren. I appreciate you
Yeah.
having me on.
Oh, my pleasure. Yeah, well, that's the thing. Like, you know, it's an art medium, and it's anything you care about. Like, it has to have emotion because then if it doesn't, then are you having passion about it? Like, are you passionate? Like, everything has the emotion, and unfortunately, I think too many businesses, workplaces, things like that. You know, we get taught, myself included, to cover the emotion and things like that. So
Mhm.
I think it's amazing. Those y'all watching, don't forget. I know we're super excited about the anthology coming, but right now, Area 51, the Helix Project, is on Kickstarter. You can get all 6 issues to catch up. If you just need a couple, or you just need that last issue, of course you can get that. It's Tuesday, February 28th at 10:30 in the evening Eastern time. So please get on it, back it already. It's completely worth it. Trevor, anything else you want to add before we get out of here tonight?
No, I mean, like I said, I'm grateful to be here. I appreciate the conversation that you
Yeah.
generated around the book. I hope people check it out. The story means a lot to me, and even if you're not the most liquid, you know, you can grab what is effectively 8 comics. So you get the 6 original first print, and then the second editions of issues 1 and 2 that have extra behind the scenes features, all for
Mhm.
$25 for the digital catch up tier. So
That's huge.
it's a great way to get in and show your support and be able to read the series and you know, hopefully if you do want a physical item down the way, that's something that we can provide. I always overprint from the Kickstarters to do
Yeah.
conventions and such. Yeah, and if anybody is going to be out on the convention circuit, stop by my tables. I'll be upcoming. I'll be at MegaCon in Orlando at the end of
Yep.
March, beginning of April. I'll be at Wicked Comic Con in Boston, which is my birthday weekend. So if you're there, come say hi.
Woo! Boston is turning up that weekend.
Yeah, yeah, and my liver, it will be shutting down likely. um, and then right after that, I'll be at the Calgary Comics Expo out in Western Canada. So I'm super stoked. Bunch of stuff coming, and you know, for better or for worse, you know, backing this Kickstarter brings us one step closer to our next stretch goal, which means that I'll be live streaming, getting a tattoo of the A cover for issue 6.
Woo! That
So
is, oh my gosh, dude, you're gonna be there hours, maybe multiple
I've
seatings,
done
I
it.
would guess.
I've done it before. I've sat for like a good 11 and a half hours before. But
What?
I feel like it's a really cool opportunity just to be like, listen, like we did a thing as a collective, as an
Yeah.
audience, and as a creative team. We have a beginning, middle, and end, and I think that's freaking special.
Yeah.
And it was really unique because once we crossed 10K, I was like, what other stretch goal do you guys want? And they were like, get it tattooed. And I was like, okay. Like,
Sure, like it's my body and something I'm really proud of. Why not? Makes complete sense.
yeah, and also, I mean, who would not want to wear Sam's artwork forever? Like, I'm
It's
totally okay with it.
it's absolutely gorgeous. I mean, I love everything about that cover. Like if there was like an original like hand drawn before it was digitized, that would be so cool. I mean, that would probably be bought up already for sure.
Yeah, and speaking of drawn in too, if there's one slot left, if somebody wants to get drawn into one of the short stories in that upcoming
Ooh,
collection,
fun.
yeah,
Yeah.
those moved really quick. So I think it's a cool opportunity. Along with that, you get a bunch of other cool perks. You become an official executive producer of the Helix Project,
Ooh.
of which that actually had gotten one of the executive producers a professional badge for New York Comic Con in 2020.
What?
Yeah, or was it 2021 maybe? I don't quite remember, but I think that was really cool. So there is some air of legitimacy. So yeah, I appreciate being here. I hope if anybody listening or watching checks out the story, it means a lot to me. And onward and upward.
Yeah. Well, where can people find you and Pocket Watch Press on social media and all that in case people want to, follow you after the Kickstarter?
For sure. Yeah. So Facebook and Instagram at Pocket Watch Press. Twitter, if you type in Pocket Watch Press, I think it'll come up, but character limitations and all, we have truncated down to P Watch Press. I think I'm probably the most active on Twitter. And you'll if you guys are on Twitter, a couple times a week, like I'm in spaces with other people in the community, and we'll talk about a number of different things. So I think that's fun. Yeah, I think those are the places to keep up. We also have a newsletter. So if you happen to peruse on over to one of our social media platforms, click the link tree in the bio, sign up for our newsletter. Best way to stay up to date with everything we're doing. We will oftentimes reveal art before it ever goes public. We will kind of show you about the bones of the storytelling and go through a little bit of the process for certain things. I do giveaways basically every 3 or 4 months for free.
Wow.
And it's a great way to be in the know with what we're doing, where we're going, how we're doing it. So definitely give that a look for sure. And again, Lauren, it has been an absolute pleasure hanging out and chatting with you.
Oh, my pleasure. Yeah. No, and all the link tree and stuff, y'all that are watching, you're like, that's too many things to remember. Again, just click. There's a bunch of links to click down there. Back to Kickstarter first, of course, but then follow and keep up. Obviously, Trevor, as you can see, is so excited about everything going on, has so much planned for you all, for me, for us, which I'm super stoked about. Trevor, thank you for coming on again. I know you're coffeeed up and struggling through, but man, you don't look like you're trying to get through a battle here. You look like you're on vacation when you're this excited talking. So it's been so great having you as well, my dude. Again, those of you guys watching, be sure to obviously check out the Kickstarter and follow Trevor and Pocket Watch Press on everything. And also like, share, and subscribe to the channel here. Super cheesy but important stuff. All those things help Trevor and Pocket Watch Press keep going. They help this channel keep going, which is great. We'll see you nerdy neighbors next time in the nerdy neighborhood.